To get started with our price prediction project, we're going to take data from a publicly accessible data set, download that to our computer, and then do some data cleaning and some data processing on that data set. What this is going to do is it's going to make sure that when we upload that to our Amazon S3 bucket, all of our data is exactly in the right spot. Something else that we'll do to set up the foundation for our AWS environment is set up a SageMaker domain. This will enable us to use Amazon SageMaker Canvas and set up an instance that we can log into and activate. So if you're excited to get started with these foundational steps for our price prediction project, then continue along and follow along for the next series of steps. To get started, I'm going to log into the AWS Management Console. So if you go to the console, this is my URL. I'm in US East 1, and this is the homepage. So what we'll do is, to start this off, we're going to type in SageMaker up top, and then that'll be the list of services. We'll see Amazon SageMaker pop up. We'll click that, and this will bring us to the Amazon SageMaker homepage for this specific service. So we can see that it's a way to build, train, and deploy ML models at scale, which is exactly what we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to first set up a domain. A domain is very important for the studio to be able to run. I already have a domain running, but I'll show you how to do this if you don't already have a domain set up. So if you click on domains, you would probably, if you haven't created a domain before, you'll probably see a screen that looks like this when you try to create a domain, or there'll be a homepage to prompt you to create this domain. And this is where you'll be able to set up that domain for SageMaker. So there is a quick setup that takes 1 minute, and then there's a standard setup which can take about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on different IAM roles that you need to create, or different policies you need to create, as well as just different configurations and integrations between how Jumpstart, Studio, SageMaker, basically Canvas, how all these different services can work. Fortunate for us, they have a really great way to just set all this stuff up pretty instantaneously, and it is just super helpful. You get public internet access and standard encryption. You get SageMaker Studio integrations. There's a shareable Studio Notebooks feature for SageMaker. You can also use SageMaker Canvas, which is what we're going to be using. And then we also use IAM authentication to use SageMaker. So this is how we're going to be setting up our domain to then use the SageMaker service in AWS. So we'll put in a name, and we can just call this test. But you could call it, whatever name you'd like. Just make sure to follow the rules for characters and not including special characters that can't be allowed. Then the next part, where we have to create a user profile, we'll have to create basically a role for the domain to work with the different permissions across AWS. So for example, SageMaker needs to be able to port data that's processed over to S3. So it needs a policy to allow the ability for SageMaker to do that operation. So that's where the role becomes really important. It does have a note here about Amazon SageMaker full access. That is an execution role that would be pairing this policy, or the execution role of your SageMaker domain needs to have Amazon SageMaker full access, and this policy attached to be able to access all these different permissions that SageMaker might need. So I have already created this rule, but if you haven't already created a role, you can see in the dropdown that you could do create a new role. And then you'll have this pop-up where you'll be able to create sort of these different permissions around what you might need to do in SageMaker. So for example, something that I do think would be helpful just for folks to know is, if you just want to be able to send data to S3, and you don't need to worry about bucket provisioning or at specific S3 buckets, because you'll be defining those anyway, you could just select any S3 bucket. The important thing to note, though, is that if you're working across many different users, you might want to only allow certain people to write to a specific bucket. That can be a safety and a security mechanism that you can put in place to ensure that certain users can't write into each other's buckets or overwrite certain buckets, or a role couldn't inadvertently overwrite something else that it's not privileged to do. You could have many different domains that have many different rules, and they could be doing certain things across different AWS accounts. So just be really cognizant of this as a specific setting, because You just want to make sure that you have least privileged access for your AWS services. So certain services don't have more provisions than necessary to accomplish the same goal. So when you create this new role, you press create role. It'll auto create this into IAM, which is Identity Access Management. You'll then find this in the dropdown, that role. So I already have the execution role here. And then we're going to need to make sure that this says enable SageMaker Canvas permissions. And this is what is going to allow us to use these different policies in our IAM role. So there's Amazon SageMaker Canvas full access. There's SageMaker Canvas AI services access. There's Canvas forecast role policy. There's Canvas full access. Fortunately for us, we don't really need to know necessarily all of what it's doing. We're just going to select this, and that's going to enable the IAM role that's being created, the execution role for the domain, to include these policies in it, which is great. So when we press submit, it's going to go through a creation process. And then by the end of it, this is usually going to take around like 10-ish minutes. It might even take up to 30 minutes, depending on how quickly this is being processed. But you should get it fairly quick at a certain point, and then you'd be able to find your domain. So I've created a domain here, and then this is where we're going to be able to use this for SageMaker services. While our SageMaker domain is getting set up, this is a great opportunity for us to go to NASDAQ.com and start downloading some data that we can use. So as you'll see here, go to NASDAQ and NASDAQ.com. And once you get there, you'll go to a homepage that looks like this. Then let's look up a stock. So we'll click on market activity. We'll go down to stocks. Then on the right, there is a search symbol. So we'll search for Apple. So this is Apple Inc. common stock, and the ticker symbol is Apple, which is what we are going to be looking at. So there is quite a lot of data that we can get. We could do, 5 days, 6 months, year to date, 1 year, 5 years max. So there is a limit basically as to how much data you can get. So this is basically the last 10 years. So this is going to be great for us to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to historical quotes. And then this is Apple's historical data. So you have the close, last close, the volume, the open, the high, and the lows, and the date for all of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on max. This is going to get us the 10 years of data. We're going to then download this data. And then we will go to a folder that we will create called data in our project. So this isn't going to communicate with AWS. This is just going to be for us to have on our computer. So I have this folder called data. It's called historical data. We'll give that a save. And then that will open up in this folder that we have. And then we'll be able to use that. In our data, we have the CSV file, and I opened it in Numbers, but you could also open this in Google Sheets. You could also open this in Microsoft Excel. But whatever you decide to do, they're going to be needing to do some formatting around the data. So we're going to need a tool to help us do that, easily and efficiently. I see the first thing that we're going to need to do is create a column called ticker, and then add the value Apple to that. So what we'll do is we'll go to here, go to the first column, I'm going to right click, and then we're going to be able to add a column. So usually there would be, something here, and then you can add a column before or after. So I'm going to do before, and then we'll do ticker, and then it's going to be AAPL, and we don't need this to be bolded. We're going to click this. There would be sort of a yellow button here, and then we're basically going to be duplicating this for all of the different columns. So we can do this super quickly, drag this all the way to the bottom, and then boom, now we have that auto-populated with this specific value, which is exactly what we want. So then what we're going to do is we're going to change close/last, this name to market close. And we can double click that to expand that column. And then we're going to change open to market open. Double click that just to expand it a bit. And then something that we're going to do is we're going to format the cells to numbers. So these are basically financial accounting formatting of digits. What we want to do is we want to make it just numbers. So it's basically going to be integers with decimals. So it'll be float data type. So what we'll do is we're going to take this. I'm going to hold command. I'm going to click this column. I'm going to click this column while still holding down command, and then this column. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to format these cells because it's going for a data format. We're going to change this to number. If you're on any sort of Excel or Google Sheets, you might need to go up to format. And then there might be a way to do that differently in case you don't have something like this. It might be, in the top or something like that under format for the cells. But we're going to be changing the type, the data format type to number. And then it auto defaults for decimals. But what we're going to do, because there's some times where there's like 3 decimals, like here there's 3 decimals, there's 3 decimals. So we have this as numbers, and then we're going to change this to number, and then we're going to make sure that there are just 2 decimals. So we'll see here that now there is only 2 decimals formatted for these values that previously had financial data. So that's great. What we'll do is that I'm going to save this specific file as a numbers file. You could save that as a, Microsoft Excel or a Google Sheets file. And what we'll do is that we'll want to export this to a CSV. We'll keep Unicode UTF-8, and then we'll do save. We're going to include that formatting, so that Apple with the date, and then we'll do export. And now our data is saved correctly. So that's great. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to upload this data set to Amazon S3 in this next step. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get our CSV data into something called Amazon S3. So we're going to switch back to our AWS Management Console. In the search bar, we're going to type in S3, and it's for scalable storage in the cloud. We'll click on this, and then this is what's going to prompt us to the Amazon S3 homepage. So just a little bit about S3. You can think about it really as buckets. These are places where you can store PDFs, you can store media files, you can store images, you can store data sets, you can store almost anything that would be considered an object. It's object storage. So anything that's a file that isn't just text, you'd sort of think about, a key value database like DynamoDB or a relational database like RDS. Those are storing text values, could be float. Data types could be any sort of number or string, but for S3, we're specifically going to be storing files, just like a CSV file. So what we're going to do is that we're going to be uploading our CSV file, and then thanks to S3, this is accessible anywhere on the internet, and you can also integrate S3 into other applications, into other services, just like what we're going to do with Amazon SageMaker to pull this data. So what we're going to do is that we're going to create a new bucket. So I'm in S3. I'm going to click this orange button that says Create Bucket. And now we're going to start to give it a unique name, kind of create some settings for it, and then we'll be able to access this data through SageMaker. So what we're going to do is that we'll give this a call. So we'll title this Apple. And we could actually name it the same way that we named the file. So we do Apple 0707 2023. Or maybe let's just say S3 bucket. Now we're going to provision this in the AWS region QS East 1. And we're going to keep all of these settings basically the same. So you won't really have to do that much for setting this up. I'm just showing you some of the steps. Also, a new feature for buckets is that encryption is turned on by default, which is a great setting, I think, for keeping your files secure or as secure as possible from the start. So we're going to do create bucket, and this can't have any underscores. So it's always good to know. So let's see if it likes hyphens. Okay, that worked well. So now our bucket was just created. It's right here. So I'm going to click on it. And this is great. So we have different tabs up here, but we see that it's accessible and that we can upload things to it. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take our data and then we're going to upload that to our bucket. To upload to our bucket, we are going to take our CSV file. We're going to press the upload button. That's orange. We're going to basically drag and drop this into the screen, which will allow us to drag and drop. We see that this is the CSV data that we were just editing, and it's going to go into this specific bucket. We're going to say upload. That was super fast. 100% of it uploaded, and now it's there. We'll close this out. And now we can actually see that this is in our S3 bucket. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to add this file to SageMaker Canvas as our data set. So we're going to type in SageMaker. In the management console again, we go back to the home page. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to check to see if our domain is ready, which it is. And it says that it's in service, which means that it's ready to go. So when we click on it, we'll click on our domain. We'll just close out that notification. And now what we're going to do is that I see that there is my default user profile, there's a launch, and then there's a number of different settings. So there is, and I'll zoom in so that you can see. So there is Studio, there's Canvas, there's TensorBoard, and then there's Spaces. But what we're going to do is that we are going to press Canvas because that's the service that we want to launch with. So that's going to redirect us to the Amazon SageMaker Canvas. It's going to create an application for us to use. It's really a user interface for us to work with SageMaker. So this will take a few minutes for this to load up, and then we'll be able to explore the application. All right, great job. You just set up the foundation for a stock price prediction project. Let's review what we just did. So we created an S3 bucket in AWS. We then downloaded a publicly accessible data set about a stock from NASDAQ. We were then able to upload that data set to our S3 bucket. And then we set up a SageMaker domain for us to then, in the future, in the next series of videos, create a SageMaker instance that we can then log into and work with a model using our data set in S3. So stay tuned for this next series of videos where you'll learn how to work with SageMaker Canvas and run a model on that data set.